In 1923, during the demolition of an ordinary building in Chicago, workers found something that made the city's chief engineer resign on the spot. Inside the walls, they discovered a plumbing system, copper pipes in perfect condition, German-made shutoff valves, and engraving 1847. The problem is that Chicago only received centralized water supply in 1856. Someone had built a water system for the city 9 years before the city even decided to build it. But this was only the beginning, because what was found next turns everything you knew about the history of modern civilization upside down. Let's go back to that building in Chicago. It was an ordinary 4-story house on West Madison Street, built, according to the documents, in 1852. It was unremarkable. Brickwork, wooden floors, typical architecture of the Gold Rush era when Chicago was growing at an incredible pace. The house had stood for 71 years and was supposed to make way for a new office building. Foreman Thomas Mackenzie, an Irishman with 30 years of construction experience, was leading the demolition. It was a standard job: tear it down, remove the debris, prepare the foundation. But when the workers began breaking the internal walls, their crowbars hit metal. Inside the walls, it wasn't wiring, it was an entire system. 3-inch diameter copper pipes ran inside the masonry, not on top of the walls as was done in later modernizations, but inside the brick structure itself. This meant the plumbing was installed at the exact moment the building was constructed, in 1852. Mackenzie called the city engineer. He arrived with 2 assistants and an archivist. They carefully opened a large section of the wall. What they saw kept them silent for several minutes. The system wasn't just built into the wall, it was perfect. The copper pipes were connected by couplings with rubber gaskets, a technology that only became standard in the 1890s. The German-made shutoff valves, stamped Königsberg 1847, were manufactured with such quality that one of them still worked after 76 years inside the wall. But the strangest thing was discovered when they traced the path of the pipes. They didn't just run through this building, they went under the foundation, connecting to an underground main that had never been marked on any city plan. The city archivist checked all the documents. Officially, in 1847, Chicago had no water system at all. Do you understand the scale of the problem? In 1847, Chicago was a small town with a population of about 16,000 people. Wells and cisterns, that was the entire water supply. The first attempt to create a centralized system only began in 1851, when a cholera epidemic forced the city council to think about clean water. Construction was finished in 1856, but someone in 1847 had already laid a professional water network with German equipment, with copper pipes from Cornwall, England, as confirmed by a metal analysis, with rubber gaskets made from a material that in 1847 was so expensive it was only used in experimental projects. Chicago's city engineer, James Whitney, compiled a 47-page report. In it, he methodically proved that the discovered system could not have been built at the stated time. The technology didn't exist. The materials were unavailable. The financing was impossible. The 1847 city budget was $3,200 a year, while the copper pipes in that building alone would have cost about $8,000 at the prices of that time. 2 weeks after submitting the report, Whitney resigned. In his statement, he wrote a single sentence: "I cannot work in a city whose history I do not understand." What made an experienced engineer who had worked at City Hall for 19 years just walk away? His assistant, Robert Jenkins, wrote to a colleague in private correspondence. James found 3 more buildings with the same systems, all dated to the 1840s, all connected to a main that doesn't exist on the plans. He was afraid that if he started digging deeper, he would find something he wasn't supposed to find. Jenkins attached a strange detail to the letter. In one of the buildings, on the inner surface of a copper pipe, a few words were engraved in Latin: Aqua vitae futuris orbibus, water of life for future cities. For future cities. In 1847, someone knew that Chicago would become a metropolis, and they were building for that future. Do you know what the craziest part of this story is? Chicago was not an exception. Over the next 10 minutes, I will show you maps, documents, and photographs proving that all over the world, someone was building water systems decades before the cities themselves appeared. If you were wondering how you didn't know this, stay tuned because I will show who hid this information for over a century and why. The findings of recent months, they change everything. But let's take it one step at a time, because Chicago is only the first point on the map. When we connect all the others, you will see a scale that is literally breathtaking. The year is 1850. San Francisco is a chaotic cluster of tents and hastily built shacks. The gold rush is just picking up speed. The population, about 800 permanent residents, plus a few thousand prospectors coming and going. The city is mud, unsanitary conditions, and disorder. Now, let's open the archives of the San Francisco Engineering Department. Fund number 234, case number 89SF. And there we find blueprints. Blueprints for water tunnels, calculated for a population of 500,000 people. Let that sink in. Less than 1,000 people live in the city, yet someone is drawing water supply plans for 500,000. San Francisco didn't reach that population until 1900, 50 years later. I have held these blueprints in my hands. I was granted access after 3 months of correspondence and signing a non-disclosure agreement, which, fortunately, expired after a year. The paper is yellowed, the edges are crumbling, but the ink is still clear. Technical German, the neat handwriting of an engineer, cross-sections of tunnels, water distribution diagrams, pressure calculations.
But the most incredible thing is the city map. The 1850 blueprints show a layout of San Francisco that wouldn't be realized until the 1880s. Streets that didn't exist yet, neighborhoods that were empty lots. Even the hills that would eventually be leveled during the city's expansion, on these blueprints, they are already shown as leveled. Someone in 1850 knew the exact development plan for San Francisco for the next 30 years. And they were building a water system under empty lots that would become central blocks decades later. When I asked the chief archivist of San Francisco, Margaret Chen, about these blueprints, she said a phrase I will never forget. Officially, this is a project, an unapproved, unrealized project by some enthusiast. But you know what's strange? When they were laying a new water main on Nob Hill in the 1920s, workers stumbled upon old tunnels, exactly where they were marked on those 1850 blueprints. Tunnels made of granite, perfect masonry, and nobody knows who built them. Now we move to Melbourne, Australia. The 1850s were the height of the gold rush on that continent. Melbourne was growing rapidly but chaotically. There was no urban planning. Everyone built wherever they wanted. But in the archives of the Melbourne Water Corporation, there is a document dated 1852. It is a plan for water reservoirs, huge stone reservoirs, each with a volume of 50,000 cubic meters, and they are located under empty land, in places where in 1852 there was nothing at all. One of these reservoirs was discovered in 1978 by accident during the construction of a shopping mall, right where it was marked on the 1850 plan. Workers broke through a concrete slab of a modern foundation and fell into a void, a huge stone hall, vaults 8 meters high, columns made of solid granite, dry, clean, with a ventilation system that still worked, air circulated through inconspicuous holes in the vault. Archaeologists dated the masonry to the mid-19th century. No, the technology was on the level of Roman aqueducts. Stones without cement fitted so precisely that a knife blade couldn't fit between them. In the 1850s, no one in Melbourne possessed such a technique. And here's the creepiest part. When they checked the 1852 plan, 12 such reservoirs were marked on it. They found one. The other 11 are still somewhere under the city. The Melbourne authorities refused to conduct a full-scale search. The official reason, impracticality. The unofficial reason, according to one of the archaeologists, they are afraid of what they will find. Next, we go to Boston, 1848. Engineer Nathaniel Bradford submits a water project to the city council. This is normal, the city is growing, water is needed. But when you look at his blueprints, questions begin to arise. Bradford proposes a system designed for 200,000 people. In 1848, Boston had 115,000. It seems logical to build with a surplus, but Bradford lays mains under areas that are not yet built up, moreover, under areas where construction isn't even planned, swamps and empty lots.
The council rejects the project as excessively ambitious. Bradford files an appeal. In it, he writes a strange sentence. "I am not proposing to build, but to restore. The system already exists. It is simply abandoned." What did he mean? The council rejects it again. Bradford disappears from public records. There are no mentions of him after 1851. But in 1895, during the expansion of the Boston subway, workers find exactly what he wrote about. Old water tunnels, abandoned, silted up, but existing, exactly where Bradford marked them on his fantastic blueprints. The brickwork dates to the first half of the 19th century, but the system was designed so professionally that the 1895 engineers decided not to build a new one, but simply to clean and use the old one. To this day, part of Boston's water system operates on Bradford's tunnels. Officially, they are called the early 1850s system. But Bradford claimed he didn't build them, he found them. Chicago, San Francisco, Melbourne, Boston, New York, there are anomalous water systems in 1840s documents there too. Philadelphia, Baltimore. Across the ocean, London, Paris, Berlin. Everywhere it's the same picture. Water supply plans created decades before the cities grew to the required size. Everywhere blueprints show excessive capacity. Everywhere systems are underdeveloped areas. Everywhere there are discoveries of abandoned tunnels that somehow coincide with these fantastic projects. Someone was planning the growth of cities, not guessing, not hoping, planning, and building the infrastructure in advance. But those are just plans. What if I told you that the systems themselves, the physical functioning water mains, are not something a 19th century civilization could even build? Let's talk about the scale, because when you see the actual dimensions of these ancient water systems, the question of dating becomes secondary. Another question takes its place. Who could have built this at all? 1. The small town of Redding in California. Population 600, a typical remote gold miner settlement that could disappear from the map at any moment. 1 saloon, 2 hotels, a church, and a few dozen houses. A local farmer digs a well on his property. At a depth of 4 meters, the shovel hits stone. The farmer widens the hole thinking he can bypass the obstacle, but it's not a stone, it's brick, old red burnt brick, laid in an arch. The farmer calls his neighbors. They dig further and find a tunnel, a water tunnel running under the town from north to south. The height of the vault is 2.5 meters. The width is 3 meters. A tunnel designed for a capacity of 100,000 tons of water per day for a town of 600 people. Do you see the absurdity? 600 people consume at most 50 to 60 tons of water, even with the most wasteful use. This tunnel could supply a city with a population of over 100,000. Redding didn't reach that population until the 1980s. But it's not just about the size, it's about the quality.
The bricks were made using a technology that was not used in California in the 1880s. Analysis showed they were fired at temperatures above 1100 degrees Celsius. You need an industrial kiln for that, which Redding didn't have. The clay composition wasn't local. The nearest deposit of suitable clay was 200 kilometers away. The arched vault was laid according to the technology of Roman aqueducts, each brick cut at a specific angle so the pressure was distributed evenly, without a single iron brace, pure physics and geometry. Engineers who examined the tunnel admitted only top-class specialists could have built this. But in the 1880s, there were no engineers in Redding at all. There was only a carpenter and a blacksmith. Who built this tunnel? The Redding City Council in 1887 didn't even have a budget to repair the only road. The idea that they could fund the construction of a 3-meter brick water conduit spanning several kilometers is laughable. Yet the tunnel exists. It is still there. Part of it is used by the modern water system. It turned out to be easier to connect to the old system than to build a new one. Moving on. Portland, Oregon, 1990s. During city expansion, excavators discover a system of cisterns under the central square, huge stone reservoirs connected by pipes. Not copper pipes a few inches wide, stone tunnels 3 meters in diameter. Tunnels you can walk through at full height. For water, in a city where, in the 1890s, 46,000 people lived. The stone masonry consists of solid granite blocks weighing 2 to 3 tons each. They are fitted so tightly that the seams are practically invisible. No mortar, a dry masonry technology that requires precision stone processing. Portland's chief engineer ordered an analysis. A geologist from the University of Oregon examined one of the blocks. Traces of processing showed the stone was not cut with a pickaxe or a chisel. It was cut with a saw, a smooth, straight cut like on a modern stone-cutting machine. The problem, stone-cutting machines of such precision only appeared in the early 20th century, and this system is dated at the latest to the mid-19th century. Furthermore, when the logistics were calculated, it became a puzzle. The nearest quarry with suitable granite was 80 kilometers away. To deliver one block weighing 2.5 tons to Portland over 1850s roads would require a team of 6 horses and an entire day, just for one block. There are more than 4,000 such blocks in the Portland system. This means 24,000 horses working daily for at least a year, or 4,000 days of work for one team, which is more than 10 years of continuous delivery, plus hundreds of stonemasons for processing, plus engineers for design, plus excavators for the pit, in a city where, at the time, there were at most 20 qualified builders. Modern hydraulic engineer David Collins recalculated these figures in 2019. His findings were published in the Journal of Historical Engineering. I quote, "The construction of the water system under Portland, given the technology of the mid-19th century, would have required at least 800 workers working 10 hours a day for 15 years. The total budget would have been approximately $2 million in the prices of that time. This is more than the entire annual budget of the state of Oregon at the time of construction."
Collins ended the article with a question. Who financed a project that exceeded the economic capabilities of the region by an order of magnitude? There is no answer, but the system exists. Reading, Portland, Chicago, San Francisco, plus 34 more cities in the U.S. alone where excessive 19th century water systems have been found. And everywhere it's the same story, a scale that doesn't match the population, technologies unavailable at the stated time, logistics exceeding the region's capabilities. But all of this could still be explained by enthusiasm or the foresight of wealthy investors, until we get to Australia. Sydney, 1850s, a colonial city of the British Empire growing rapidly due to the gold rush. Water is needed. The city council orders an artesian well. An artesian well is when you drill deep down to a pressurized aquifer and the water rises by itself. In the 1850s, this was cutting-edge technology. The typical depth of artesian wells at that time was 30 to 50 meters. It was considered a great achievement. Contractor William Thormond takes the job. He drills for a month, 2, 3. The city council begins to get nervous. It's taking too long. In the 4th month, Thormond announces the well is ready. Depth 792 meters. In 1856, with manual equipment. That is not a typo. 792 meters. For comparison, the deepest well drilled in Europe by that point was 210 meters, and it took 3 years of work using a steam engine. Thormond drilled 792 meters in 4 months with a team of 8 people using equipment that, according to the inventory, consisted of drilling rods, hand winches, and a system of blocks. Modern drillers call this physically impossible. Drilling to such a depth manually means you don't just rotate the drill, you have to lift it every few meters to clear the rock. The weight of the drill string at a depth of 792 meters is over 6 tons. 8 people manually lifting 6 tons every 2 hours? But the well exists, and it still provides water today. In 2003, the Geological Survey of Australia investigated this well. It is operational and has never been closed. The inner diameter is 15 centimeters, perfectly smooth for its entire depth. The walls are lined with metal pipes, and the joints are sealed with lead, a technology that became standard in the 20th century. The lead geologist of the expedition, Dr. Patricia Henderson, wrote in the report, "The well is designed and executed at a level that only became available to the industry with the advent of rotary drilling rigs in the 1900s. We cannot explain how this was done in the 1850s."
Now pay attention. When the Sydney City Council archives were requested to find details of the contract with Thormont, a strange thing came to light. The contract exists, but it says drilling depth until the aquifer is reached, but not less than 700 meters. Not less than 700 meters. In 1856, the client demanded drilling to a depth that was considered fantasy. It was as if they knew in advance at what depth the water was located. And this is not the only such well. There are 12 of them, all drilled in the 1850s, 1860s, all with depths ranging from 600 to 850 meters, all allegedly by hand. And they all have one common detail that I will show you now, a detail that finally breaks the official version of history. Imagine you wrote a brilliant book. It's a masterpiece that will change the world. You publish it. It becomes incredibly popular, and suddenly your name disappears from all copies, from all records, as if you never existed. This is exactly what happened to the creators of the 19th century water systems. Let's go back to those 12 wells in Sydney. All were drilled by one contractor, William Thormont. After completing the last well in 1863, Thormont received official thanks from the City Council and a bonus of £500 sterling, a huge sum for those times. And then he disappeared. He didn't die. He didn't move away. He simply vanished from all records after 1864. There isn't a single document with his name, no land records, no tax returns, no death certificates. The man who executed the largest engineering project in the history of colonial Sydney simply ceased to exist on paper. I contacted descendants of the Thormont family. I managed to find them through genealogy sites. His great-granddaughter, Elizabeth Thormont, lives in Melbourne. She told me a story passed down in the family. William moved to New Zealand after 1864 under a different name. Nobody knows why, but the family kept a letter he wrote in 1868. I quote from memory because Elizabeth didn't allow me to photograph it. "I did the work I was assigned, but when I tried to explain what I found at the depth, they told me to be quiet. When I refused, they gave me a choice, either leave and forget, or stay and regret." What did he find at a depth of 792 meters? The family doesn't know. The letter cuts off at that sentence. But Thormont is not the only one. Out of 47 chief engineers of major water projects from the 1840s to the 1890s in the US, Australia, and Europe, 29 have no biographical data after their projects were completed. I spent 6 months digging through archives. I made a list. I checked every name, and the picture that emerged was chilling. Nathaniel Bradford, Boston, disappeared in 1851, a year after submitting his fantastic water project.
Albert Jenkins, Philadelphia, last mentioned in 1857, immediately after completing an underground reservoir for 200,000 tons of water. The reservoir still works. Jenkins is gone. Friedrich Müller, the German engineer who designed the Chicago water system, officially died in 1859 of a heart attack. But there is a strange detail. He was buried in a closed casket, and only 3 people attended the funeral, even though Müller was well known and respected. One of his colleagues wrote in his diary, "I don't believe Friedrich is dead. Everything is too hasty, too convenient." And then the fires began. Chicago, 1871, the Great Fire. A third of the city burns down, but not randomly. The areas with those anomalous water systems built in the 1840s are the ones that burn. The City Hall, where the engineering department archives were kept, burned to the ground. Boston, 1872, A fire in the city center. Again, the area above the old water tunnels burns. The engineering management archives destroyed. San Francisco, 1906, an earthquake and subsequent fire. Not the whole city burns, specific areas burn, and once again, these are the areas above the old water systems. The city archives, the documents of the hydraulic engineering department, all in flames. Seattle, 1889, a fire destroys 25 blocks. The City Archive building, which housed the plans for the city's first water system built in the 1850s, turns to ash. You could write it off as a coincidence. Cities in the 19th century burned often, wooden buildings, primitive fire protection, but in each of these fires, it was specifically the buildings with the engineering project archives that burned. The residential blocks around them remained untouched. I found newspaper articles from that time. The Chicago Tribune, October 14, 1871. It is strange that the fire, which began on the west side, jumped across the river specifically to the City Archive building, while closer structures remained intact. The Boston Globe, November 11, 1872. Firefighters note that the fire did not spread with the wind, but seemed to move purposefully toward the central administrative buildings. Does this sound like a conspiracy theory? Perhaps, but the facts are these. By the 1920s, the original documentation for most major water projects from the 1840s to 1860s had been destroyed. Only the structures themselves remained. And what did remain? The systems themselves, physical objects that cannot be burned. And here is where it gets interesting, because when the documents are gone, people start studying the objects themselves, and they find details that the documents might have explained, but without documents, these details become a mystery. In the Portland water system, those granite tunnels, workers discovered an engraved inscription on one of the blocks during a 2011 restoration. It was almost completely erased, but still readable under a certain angle of light.
Ordo out of chaos. Water is life. Order out of chaos? Water is life? Latin inscription in a utilitarian water system? A motto that sounds Masonic? And most importantly, why was the inscription erased? And not erased by time, but intentionally. Tool marks are visible under a microscope. Someone wanted this inscription to disappear. They didn't remove the block, they specifically erased the text, as if the existence of the block was normal, but the text on it was unacceptable. Similar erased inscriptions were found in Chicago, 2, Boston, 1, and San Francisco, 3, all in Latin, all erased intentionally but not completely, as if the person erasing wanted to make them unreadable but didn't have time for a perfect job. What was successfully restored? Aqua Vitae Futuris Urbibus, Chicago, Water of Life for Future Cities. Ab Antiquo Ordine, Boston, from an ancient order. Custodes Aquarum, San Francisco, the guardians of the waters. Who are these guardians of the waters? What ancient order? And why did they need to build water systems for future cities? There are no archives. There are no engineers. All that remains are stones with half-erased texts that raise more questions than answers. You know what strikes me most? Every time I tell this to a historian or an engineer, the first reaction is always, "Why don't I know about this?" And then when they start checking, they find even more. More erased names, more burned archives, more creatorless systems. But let's ask a question. If all these systems were built by one group, one organization, how big was it? And this is where a completely different story begins. What if I told you that all these water systems, Chicago, San Francisco, Portland, Boston, Sydney, Melbourne, are not separate projects? What if they are parts of a single global system? It sounds crazy, but let's look at the facts. Number 1. Amateur researcher Thomas Warren from Oregon analyzes old maps of water systems on the West Coast. He overlays them, trying to find common patterns in the design. And he notices a strangeness. The water systems of different cities have the same base structure, not just similar, identical.
The diameter of the main pipes, the angle of the feeder tunnels, the distance between reservoirs, everything matches to within a few percentage points. It's as if all these cities were built according to one blueprint. Warren publishes his findings on a blog. Other researchers join in. They start checking cities on the East Coast, then Europe, then Australia. And everywhere the same pattern. By 2012, a group of enthusiasts creates an interactive map. It marks all cities with anomalous 19th century water systems, and when you connect them with lines based on similar structure equals one system, you get a network. A global underground water supply network.
But that's not all. The craziest part is the mains. Between some cities, there are underground water tunnels connecting their systems, tunnels hundreds of kilometers long. The first such tunnel was discovered in 1967. Builders of a highway between San Francisco and Sacramento stumbled upon an underground cavity. They decided to check what it was. It turned out to be a water tunnel. Brickwork, 1.5 meters in diameter, running in a perfectly straight line to the northeast. They traced it using ground-penetrating radar. The tunnel runs for 160 kilometers, from the outskirts of San Francisco to the suburbs of Sacramento, under hills, under rivers, under mountain ranges, absolutely straight. The engineers were speechless. To build such a tunnel in the 19th century would have required precision geodetic marking over distances that they didn't know how to measure accurately back then. It would have required the synchronization of work across dozens of intermediate points. It would have required technologies that simply didn't exist. And that tunnel is not the only one. Between Boston and New York, there's a tunnel 350 kilometers long. It was discovered in 1989 during the construction of a telecommunications cable. It's abandoned and partially flooded, but the structure remains. Stone masonry, 2 meters wide. It runs straight through the states of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, right to the northern outskirts of New York. No one knows who built it, no records, no mentions, just a tunnel. Underground, connecting the two largest cities on the East Coast. In Australia, between Sydney and Melbourne, there's an underground main 900 kilometers long. It was partially found in 2003 during geological surveys and traced by radar. It runs under the Great Dividing Range, a mountain system up to 2,200 meters high. Modern engineers say to dig such a tunnel today would require a boring machine costing $50 million and 3 years of work. In the 19th century, it was impossible. But the tunnel exists. When all the known mains were connected, a picture emerged that gives you goosebumps. In North America, a network of 8 main tunnels linking cities from San Francisco to Boston. In Europe, at least 5 major mains connecting Paris, London, Berlin, Vienna, and Rome. In Australia, 3 tunnels connecting Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. These are not separate projects. This is continental infrastructure designed as a single system. And here is what is truly terrifying. Each of these mains was built before the connected cities grew enough to need such a connection. The San Francisco-Sacramento tunnel dates roughly to the 1850s. At that time, Sacramento was a gold miners' village, and San Francisco was just starting to grow. Why did they need a 160-kilometer water conduit? The Boston-New York Tunnel can be traced to the 1840s. New York wasn't a megacity then. Boston was a medium-sized port city. Why link them with an underground main? Unless the builders knew that these cities would become metropolises, and they were building in advance. But how could they know? Urban planning in the 19th century was chaotic. No one could predict which city would grow and which would wither. The gold rush created towns in a month and killed them in a year. Economic crises changed trade routes. Railroads decided the fate of entire regions. Yet someone knew. They knew that San Francisco would become the largest port in the West. They knew Chicago would turn into the continent's transport hub. They knew Melbourne would be the capital of Australia. And they built for that future. It wasn't just foresight. It was a plan. I interviewed Dr. Marcus Lane, a professor of urban history at the University of California. He specializes in 19th century city development. I showed him the map with the marked anomalous water systems and underground mains. He studied it for 20 minutes. Then he said, "This is a pattern of imperial planning. This is how the Romans planned infrastructure, building roads and aqueducts in territories they intended to colonize. But the scale here is different.
This is not an empire planning the growth of its provinces. This is someone planning the growth of civilization. Who could plan at such a level? What organization had the resources, knowledge, and motivation to build continental infrastructure for cities that didn't yet exist? And here we come to the strangest part, because traces of this organization do exist. They weren't completely erased. They are just hidden so deep that no one ever connected them to water systems. Until now. In 2018, an archivist in London found a document. It was the charter of a society founded in 1823. Name? The Order of the Waterway Guardians. The goal? Written in the charter, providing water to the cities of the future for the glory of the Great Plan. And a list of names. 47 names of founders. Among them, William Thormond, Nathaniel Bradford, Friedrich Müller. All the engineers who disappeared. They didn't disappear. They were part of the order. And what happened to the order is a whole other story. A story of a cover-up. Chicago. The official version, the fire started in a barn on the west side when Mrs. O'Leary's cow knocked over a kerosene lamp. In 2 days, 9 square kilometers burned, 300 people died, and 100,000 were left homeless. But there are details they don't mention in the textbooks. The fire started on October 8th at 9 p.m. By 11 p.m., it had engulfed 3 blocks. By midnight, a dozen. By 3 a.m., the entire center was burning, but not in a random way. The fire spread against the wind. That night, a southwest wind was blowing, but the fire moved southwest, right against the airflow.
Witnesses described it as rivers of fire that flowed wherever they wanted, ignoring the wind direction. One firefighter, John O'Connor, wrote in a report, quote, "We surrounded the source of the fire on West Street. The fire should have gone north with the wind, but it jumped 2 blocks south and broke out at the City Archive building. It was as if it was waiting there." The Chicago Archive burned completely. The building was stone. The fire shouldn't have spread easily inside, but the interior rooms burned in minutes. It was as if an accelerant had been used. Now, look at the map of the fire. I overlaid it on the map of the 1840s to 1850s water systems. The burned area almost exactly matches the districts under which the anomalous water tunnels were located. Coincidence? Let's look further. Boston, 1872. San Francisco, 1906. Seattle, 1889. Baltimore, 1904. In each case, the same pattern. The Great Boston Fire of November 9, 1872. It started in a garment factory on Summer Street. In 12 hours, it destroyed 65 acres of the city center. The engineering department building, where the water system blueprints were stored, burned down. But the neighboring blocks did not burn. The fire stopped as if it had reached its goal. An eyewitness, Boston Globe journalist William Rogers, wrote an article that the editors did not publish. The manuscript was found in his papers after his death. There is a sentence, "I saw men in dark cloaks entering the engineering department an hour before the fire broke out there. They carried out several boxes. When I tried to ask who they were, I was pushed away. An hour later, the building was burning." San Francisco, 1906. Earthquake and fire. The earthquake was real, magnitude 7.9, but the fire. The fire started in 53 spots simultaneously, officially due to broken gas pipes, but there are reports from fire brigades. San Francisco Fire Chief Dennis Sullivan, who died on the first day when a building collapsed, left a note for his deputy. It was found in his desk. "If I die today, know this. This is not just an earthquake. Yesterday, a man called me. He didn't give his name. He said, 'Tomorrow, the city will be cleansed.' I didn't understand what he meant. Now I do." It was as if the goal of the fire was not to destroy the city, but to destroy access to the old systems, to bury them under a layer of new construction, to make it so that no one could go down and study them. And indeed, after all these fires, the entrances to the old water systems were walled up. In Chicago, 34 known access points to underground tunnels. After the 1871 fire, only 2 remained. In Boston, 19 entrances. After 1872, 3.
In San Francisco, all access points were sealed with concrete in 1907-1908 under the pretext of restoration work. But who was doing this? Who coordinated this cleanup? 1. The National Archives of the UK. Historian James Dalrymple is researching documents of the 19th century Colonial Office, the department responsible for managing British colonies. In a folder marked Infrastructure Projects of Australia, 1850 to 1870, he finds a strange document.
The brothers of Australia have finished the work. 12 wells drilled. The networks are complete. Thormond has done his part. I suggest starting the Great Hiding while the American brothers finish their business. The order must go into the shadows no later than 1880. The Great Hiding, 1880. Dalrymple found 3 more documents related to this Order of Guardians. One is a list of names, 47 people. William Thormond, present. Nathaniel Bradford, present. Friedrich Mueller, present. All those disappeared engineers. The second document is a financial report for 1856. The order's expenses, £2.4 million. For comparison, the entire British Empire's budget for colonial projects that year was £5 million. The order was spending half of the imperial budget. On what? On water projects in all regions of presence. The third document is the minutes of a closed meeting from 1879, a phrase that haunts me. The work is finished. The cities have water. The plan is working. Now we must disappear so that no one asks questions. Future generations will find our systems and think their ancestors built them. That is better than the truth. Dalrymple tried to find more documents. He requested access to closed funds of the Colonial Office. He was refused. He filed an appeal. Refused again. He contacted me in 2019, sent copies of the 3 documents he found, and said, "I can no longer research this topic. They made it clear that if I continue, I will lose access to all archives. But you can. You are not an academic. They cannot blackmail you." I tried. I requested access to the same funds through a Freedom of Information request. I received the answer, "The requested materials are classified under the Official Secrets Act of 1911 and are not subject to declassification until 2073. Wait, documents about 19th century water systems are classified until 2073? Why? The official reason: they contain information regarding the security of critical infrastructure. Unofficially, no one explains what 150-year-old blueprints have to do with modern security. But the order didn't disappear without a trace. They left signs, symbols, marks on stones that we are still finding today. And these symbols tell a story that is much stranger than we could have imagined. Because the order wasn't just building water pipes, they were building something else, something that still flows beneath us. 1. London. Construction of the new subway line, the Elizabeth Line. Workers are boring a tunnel under Covent Garden. Depth 40 meters. Suddenly, the drill falls into a void. Engineers stop the work. They go down to check. Under London, at a depth of 40 meters, a water tunnel is discovered. Brickwork, 1.5 meters in diameter. Dry, and there are no records of its existence. Archaeologists date the masonry, mid-19th century, roughly 1850-1860. But on the maps of the city's water supply from that time, this tunnel doesn't exist. On modern maps, it's not there either.
It's impossible. We mapped everything that is under London, every tunnel, every pipe, every sewer. That tunnel shouldn't be there, but it is. Workers explore the tunnel further. They find a strangeness. On the walls, every 500 meters, there are symbols carved into the brick. A circle with a triangle inside. Under it, wavy lines. It looks like water. An expert on historical symbols, Professor Elizabeth Cornwall from Oxford, studied the photographs. Her conclusion: this is not an ordinary stonemason's mark. It is a ritual symbol. The circle is eternity.
The triangle is divine providence. The waves are life force. Together, it means the eternal plan grants life. This is Masonic symbolism, but specific. I haven't seen this combination in known Masonic lodges. Masonic symbolism in a water system. Ritual signs in utilitarian infrastructure. Why? I contacted a Masonic historian, Dr. Arthur Blake. I showed him photographs of the symbols from different cities. He studied them through a week. Then he called me. These symbols are part of the teaching of sacred geometry, a concept that the world can be changed through the correct arrangement of architectural elements. Water in this teaching is the carrier of life force. By controlling water, you control the development of civilization. By controlling water, you control civilization. Suddenly, everything starts to fall into place. The order wasn't just building water pipes. They were building a system to control city growth. They brought water to where they wanted a city to arise. They didn't bring it to where they didn't want growth. Look at the map. All the largest cities in the world in the 19th and 20th centuries, the ones that grew from nothing, have anomalous water systems. Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Sydney, Melbourne, Johannesburg. All of them received water before they became big. And what about cities that were large in the 19th century but then withered? Check them. They don't have such systems. For example, St. Louis. In 1870, it was the fourth largest city in the U.S. In 1900, it was eighth. Now, it's 61st. In St. Louis, there are no excessive water systems from the 1850s. There is only a standard water supply built as it grew. But why? What is the goal? If it was a plan, whose plan was it? And what was being planned? Dr. Blake proposed a theory. 19th century Freemasonry was not just a brotherhood. It was a network of influence spanning all levels of society. Many major industrialists, politicians, and engineers were Masons. If the higher levels of the order decided to shape the future through infrastructure control, they had the resources and connections to do it. But even the Masons didn't have the resources for continental projects, right? Resources to dig a 900-kilometer tunnel under Australian mountains. Resources to build water systems worth millions of pounds sterling. Unless they had access to something more.
Let's go back to the findings. The granite blocks of Portland, cut with a saw that didn't exist. The Sydney wells, 800 meters deep, drilled by hand. Physically impossible. Tunnels, hundreds of kilometers long, dug with precision that requires modern geodesy. What if the order had technologies we don't know about? Technologies they received from somewhere. I know how it sounds. I know what you're thinking right now. He's gone into conspiracy theories, ancient civilizations, aliens. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that in the 19th century, there were many experimental technologies that later disappeared. Steam engines with efficiency we can't reproduce, electrical generators of an unclear operating principle, acoustic drilling rigs that destroyed rock with sound. Many of these technologies were developed specifically in the 1840s to 1860s, and many of the developers were Masons. This would explain everything. Why the systems are so perfect, why the scales are so incredible, why all of this had to be hidden. Because if society found out that someone possessed technologies decades ahead of their time, it would cause panic, questions, investigations, revolutions. It was easier to erase the traces, burn the archives, remove the names, wall up the entrances, and leave only the systems, working, anonymous, built by our ancestors. Let people be proud of the engineering achievements of the 19th century without asking how exactly they were achieved. And the strategy worked. For 150 years, we used these systems without asking questions, until we started digging deeper, until we started finding inconsistencies, until we started connecting the dots. Today, water flows beneath us through pipes we didn't build, through systems we cannot explain. And every day, somewhere, a new tunnel, a new reservoir, a new symbol on a stone is found. This investigation continues. Every month there are new finds. every month there are new questions. If you have information, if you have worked on construction sites and seen something strange, if you know stories about old water systems, share them. Recently, I received a message from a worker who participated in the expansion of the New York subway. He asked me not to use his name. In the message was a photo, a tunnel, old, brick. On the wall, that same symbol, a circle, a triangle, waves, and under it, a new find, a date, carved into the stone, 1823, the year the Order of the Waterway Guardians was founded. The work is not yet finished. Not finished in 1823, or not finished even now.
What if the plan they began in the 19th century is working right now, shaping cities, directing development, controlling the growth of civilization through what flows beneath our feet? Or is all of this just a series of coincidences? 19th century enthusiasts building on a grand scale, lost technologies, forgotten methods. Are we seeing patterns where none exist? I don't know the answer, but I know that under every major city in the world, there are systems we didn't build, tunnels that are not marked on maps, symbols that no one explains, and they are still working. There is only one question: for what purpose? After the release of this information, 3 archives in London, Chicago, and Sydney simultaneously closed access to 19th century documents for restoration. No restoration period was specified. Coincidence?